How you doing? It's me, John Weir. I want to apologize for the antelope. It's my grandfather Bob Owen shot it in Wyoming in like 1940 in a antelope shooting competition with the governors of 5 states. So my mother says. I want to apologize to PETA. And the flag is my father's, or rather my mother's. The government sent it to my mother after my father died. So that's my decor, flag and pronghorn. I wanted to... It's Gay Pride weekend in New York City. It's unbelievably hot. And I wanted to share something I wrote a long time ago. Part of it is in my novel, What I Did Wrong, which is available on Amazon.com. Don't read it, just buy it. And this is called Neorealism at the Infiniplex. And it goes like this. My friend Dave died of AIDS in the fall of 1994, and I planned to be sad about it, but it turned out I was relieved. I'm not proud of this. In my fantasy, he would have died in my arms, and the screen would have faded to black like in a movie, an Italian neo-realist ending. A grim death, but a noble one, suffered in a time of war or shortly after war. What happened instead was, he was so mean for the last 3 months of his life that I stopped liking him. Not just at the time, but for all time, both in the season of his death and retroactively forever. His death wasted our 5 years of friendship, and I lost him in retrospect. I don't remember what I ever liked about him. People say they can't believe their beloved mother, husband, son is gone, but I had another feeling. I couldn't convince myself that I'd ever known and loved someone named David. That was the worst thing that happened. No. The worst thing was, he left me some money that took a long time to clear. In 1997, I got about $3,000, and I decided to rent a place in upstate New York. Because I teach, I have my summers free, so I sublet my East Village apartment, bought a used car at a police auction in Jamaica, Queens, and signed a lease, a 3-month lease on a converted chicken coop. It lay on the grounds of an old Dutch farm, and it was vast and cheap, with a high ceiling and a sleeping loft. There was no furniture, so I bought a table and a futon. I put the table in the kitchen in front of the window with a view of an open field. On the table I put my laptop computer and a stack of books I'd never finished reading. Proust, all of Proust. Paradise Lost, The Naked and the Dead. I was going to catch up on my reading, write things, eat right, and go running on the back roads and country lanes, and finally lose all the weight I gained while Dave was dying. Of course, I hate back roads and woods and country lanes. How would I have forgotten that? I hate views. I especially dislike chicken coops. Mine still faintly smelled of chickens. When I looked up from my work through the window, I saw an open field, trees beyond it, hills around that, the sky everywhere. Not the reassuringly man-made sky of lower Manhattan, the chemical sky, but an intimidating sky so awesome and inhuman that in order to explain it, you were forced to invent God. When I fell asleep over Paradise Lost, sitting outside in an Adirondack chair with bark clinging to its arms and legs, I woke up scraped and sunburned and covered in bug bites. A mile down the road, at the food co-op, the vegan cashier would not sell me bug spray. Within days, I was aching for anything lethal or synthetic. I was nostalgic for pizza and car fumes and Avenue A. Of course, there were people living in my apartment, German students on holiday, so I couldn't go home. Twice I drove down to the city and paid $80 to sleep in the jungle room at the Q-Motor Inn. Obviously, I couldn't spend my summer traveling back and forth between a New Paltz chicken coop and a by-the-hour motel on the Grand Central Parkway in Queens. So I loaded Proust and Milton and Norman Mailer into the back of my car, and I went to the movies. I moved to the multiplex. To many different multiplexes, which are so abundant in the wilderness that I began to think of all of upstate New York as a vast Infiniplex. From late June to early September, I went to every several-screen movie theater from Kingston to Yonkers, listening to Billy Joel songs on my car radio and crying because I was old enough to remember liking them without irony. When I wasn't in my car, I was sitting front row, center, with a bucket of popcorn and a Coke, watching Bruce Willis in Armageddon. You see how entertainment was not the point. If I kept going back to Armageddon, I thought it would eventually turn out to have a plot. I saw it 6 times. It never did. Of course, I was grateful. I was relieved to be spared the pain of cause-effect. Thank God for a plotless world. Watching Bruce Willis, draped in an American flag, standing in the floor of a crater in a giant piece of orbiting igneous rock, saying goodbye to the world, while his daughter, Liv Ullmann, on Earth, weeps beautifully and hopes that at least Ben Affleck will be sent home from outer space, was the most satisfying emotional experience I have ever had. I'm through with things that really happen, like people die and you don't. Or they die and you don't feel bad in the way that you want. Which is how I got in trouble with Saving Private Ryan, Steven Spielberg's feel-good D-Day massacre movie. I saw it 16 times. I saw it twice a week for 2 months, like short-term therapy, or a lover who beats you every time you go back, despite your insane faith that one of these times it'll end differently. Saving Private Ryan is more believable than Armageddon, but that for me wasn't the point. I didn't care about World War II. Isn't it a movie about a bunch of gay men who rent a house in Fire Island in 1983? Consider the evidence. Hundreds of handsome young men dressed in expensive outerwear approaching the shore of a famous beach as the film opens. A famous beach where people casually speak French and stern Nordics are lurking in the dunes with their hands on their weapons. We meet 8 men, just enough for a half share in the pines. Some of them are Midwestern. Once ashore, they go from house to house dressed in uniform, carrying accessories, listening to Edith Piaf, singing Duke Ellington songs. In my solitude, you haunt me. All the while, searching for just one cute boy. And every few days, one of them dies. It's the same plot as Longtime Companion, one of the first films about AIDS. A bunch of men with no special talent or need for intimacy or closeness have to deal with the fact that everyone they know is dying all around them all the time. Sometimes they abandon their dead, sometimes they bury them. They do what they can despite their sense that the next person dead might be you. Later their friends are buried far from their hometowns, out of sight of their folks, gone in a way their parents can't or won't understand. When Dave died, his parents, his mom and dad, came up from Florida in a rental car. He died Wednesday and was buried on Friday. They left Thursday morning and drove, they said, straight through. Of course, they were 2 hours late for the funeral service on the Upper West Side of Manhattan at Riverside Memorial Chapel. The service had to be finished by sundown because he was Jewish. It was a Friday afternoon, and his parents had insisted long distance, even though Dave hated God or the mention of God, that there be religious last rites. So we waited in the chapel. It was the 5th time I'd been there for a dead friend, and we went through 2 rabbis. Each waited an hour and then had to leave. Dave was naked in a pine box loaded with ice to keep the body from stinking. The coffin was sweating as the ice was slowly dissolving. We had a bucket under the corner to catch the drips. I thought of Dave floating in this cocktail like a lemon wedge. All of his friends, all the mourners, his coworkers and his friends, and cute boys from the Chelsea gym were sitting quietly in the pews, listening to the drip, drop, drip into the bucket. The stage was set, in other words, and the effects were starting to melt, and still we had no parents, and now suddenly no rabbi. try finding a rabbi free on the Upper West Side of Manhattan on a Friday afternoon. I made a plea in the chapel. Does anybody know... I didn't know how to ask it. I felt in need of Mel Brooks. He would have struck the right tone. But it turned out that somebody had a cousin who knew somebody who knew somebody, and I made the calls. Hi, you don't know me, but I need a rabbi. It took 10 calls. The sun was setting. Thank God some Jews aren't observant. People were answering their phones. Finally we get a rabbi. I never said AIDS. I didn't know what to say about AIDS. I was afraid he wouldn't do it. I said nothing. I said Dead Guy on Ice, which sounds like a hardcore band. But he understood. He came to the chapel. Why wasn't he busy on a Friday night? I didn't want to know. Cut rate rabbi. Although it cost us as much as the other two. We paid for 3, we got 1. Not the star, but the road company replacement. We start with Nathan Lane, we end up with Steve Guttenberg. He's available. Whatever. He showed up at the chapel about 5 minutes ahead of David's parents. Their rental car, had broken down in Philadelphia. Never mind that the most direct route, the quickest route, is not through Philadelphia. That's why God gave us the New Jersey Turnpike. It's a straight shot from Jacksonville to Bayonne on I-95. Why tour Philadelphia? Whatever. I had avoidances of my own. Just before the parents appeared, the rabbi took me into a small room and he said, "Tell me something about your friend. Say 3 things. I don't need more than 3. Make it quick. Make it personal. And tell me now." And I thought, all I could think was, well, he spent a lot of time at the gym, which was an awful thing to say, that he was a gym-going muscle queen, a gay cliche. Although it was true. Dave went to the gym the way Baptists go down to the river. Still, there were plenty of other things to say about him. He was a writer. He'd published 3 books, won awards. What prevented me from listing these accomplishments? Grief is sneaky, not sobering. It refuses to suppress your worst impulse. Then suddenly the parents appear. So there's the sudden attention to the parents, who presumably have precedence, although they had never once visited David in the hospital, had not, in fact, seen him in over a year, had called only on Sundays when the rates were low, and had sent, as a token of their concern, only a package of home-baked chocolate chip cookies for a guy who couldn't digest so much as a piece of dry toast without soiling his shorts. Dave made me eat the cookies in the hospital room while he swore at his nurses, and then he swore at me, and then he died, and then we had a 10-minute service, a 10-minute funeral service, where the parents got front row seats. The rabbi ripped garb from their clothing, whipped cloth from them in honor of a ceremony that didn't include my dead friend, who had wanted to have his wrist tattooed at the last minute because he didn't want to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Kaddish was said, and the rabbi made some remarks. He said, Dave was a man who loved sports, especially at the gym, and a room full of people, not his parents, burst out laughing because David was famous at the gym for walking up to cute naked boys in the steam room and saying, "Hi, I have AIDS. Would you have lunch with me?" Kaddish was endless. I don't know when I've hated God so much. We'd tracked down a picture taken of Dave, the last picture taken before he went into the hospital, and we got it blown up, and it was standing on an easel next to the rabbi, an awful picture. David looked rabbity and shrunken and pale. He'd lost half his body weight in the 2 months before he went into the hospital, dropping down from 160 pounds to just over 80. And this photograph was how I would always remember him now. A desiccated huddle of bones under sacked skin that happened to be my dying, now dead friend. His body had nothing to do with him. His funeral service had nothing to do with anyone who cared about him. It was an appalling farce. I had to be polite to his parents, who, if they loved him at all, had nonetheless never managed to visit their dying son. They knew he was dying. If he were my son, I would have moved into the hospital room to be with him. I would have postponed my life, which is basically what I did. And they were his parents. They sent cookies. I despised them. I wish they had died instead. I hope they die soon, lost and alone and uncared for by their own flesh and blood. Afterwards, I had to talk to them like I thought they were human. They barely registered my humanity or my closeness to Dave. They had me down as concerned friend, official funeral parlor role. I wasn't family. It was their loss, not mine. And I had exactly a minute to cry. It happened in a closet. No kidding. I found a coat closet, oddly empty for November. I wasn't going to cry in front of somebody's suddenly available parents. I thought, well, as well here as anywhere else. I thought, this is where it turns out I was always going to have my private sorrowing moment. I don't believe in God, but I do believe in the fated emptiness of coat closets and private moments of sequestered grief. I leaned against the corner and folded myself into a crease in the papered wall, as if the angle of a building could hold me. In a minute, I was going to have to go out into the reception room, answer questions, give directions to the cemetery in Queens, to the ice skating rink at Rockefeller Center. That's what the parents wanted to know. They'd travel all the way from Florida. They weren't going to leave without seeing the sights, getting souvenirs. My son died of AIDS, and all I got was his lousy T-shirt. But for the moment, while they waited, I crouched under coat hooks and cried. It was almost the only time I cried for AIDS. Half the people I knew when I was 25 years old are dead, and I cried while Dave's parents waited, and I cried at 16 different showings of the last scene of Saving Private Ryan. The scene that Amy Taubin of the Village Voice called creepy. I thought it was the whole point. Actually, the popcorn was the point. It was my steady diet. In every movie theater in upstate New York, the popcorn is served by angry, underpaid teens who, even though they know you're late and the movie starts in 30 seconds, nonetheless stare at a point slightly to the left of your head and say in a flat voice, as slowly as possible, "Do you want the upgrade to the super combo?" And I say, "Yes, now, immediately, please, I want, I say, slapping money on the counter, exact change. God forbid I should have to wait for them to make change. Please, a giant vat of popcorn soaked in butter to ruin my heart, and salt for my tears so I can taste them on my face hours later when Steven Spielberg makes me watch an old guy walk through acres of bone-white crosses, a military graveyard in France, searching for the headstone of a friend who died in battle instead of him." It's the end of Saving Private Ryan. World War II is over. We won. Spielberg returns us to the framing narrative, a scene more than 50 years after the war, in the present moment, a sunny day in 1997. Private Ryan, who was saved by his friends, is now an old man, no longer Matt Damon. He's white-haired, slow-moving, unglamorous. All throughout the flashback to World War II, presumably, he's been walking with his family, his wife and his son and his son's wife and his grandchildren, up and down the rows of white crosses. Suddenly he stops in front of one of them. The John Williams music swells in the background, and an American flag whips overhead, although we're in France. You're right, Amy Taubin, it's schmaltz. Obviously, I've got bad taste. I'm moved by schlock. He drops to his knees as if thrown there by an electrical shock in front of one of the bone-white crosses. He's on the ground, weeping, not dead. He looks at his wife. "Tell me I'm a good man," he says. His family's standing beside him and behind him, kind of appalled. They've got no idea what he's talking about. Clearly he's never mentioned the war, or how he was saved, or why his friends died. His family doesn't know what he's talking about, but I do. He wants them to know what it's like to lose everything and never discuss it, so that you lose it twice, both in the moment of its going and afterwards in the official record of its going. So two things are gone. Dave's gone and you're gone. And maybe you get a moment to cry for what now you will never be able to tell. That all the people you loved for a season had died, and that you, for years and years after, quite simply, had not.